So Thando, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of manufacturing. But before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
For me, it's a bit of a pie situation, or 2000 in particular. I actually grew up in a town called Frankfurt in the Free State, as well as in the town in Pietermaritzburg in KZN, because my parents are from both towns.
Right.
Interestingly enough, actually, because of the political situation that my dad was going through, I became then shipped to Frankfurt, where he actually originated, my grandparents were. And it's an Afrikaans town, and so my Afrikaans is a bit crap, since it's not the best Afrikaans you can speak, but I speak a little bit of Afrikaans and I can understand it. And then grew up in the township of Maritzburg, which is called Sobantu. It's quite a known township in the KZN area. So yeah, most of my life I actually spent in Frankfurt and between boarding schools, literally. So I always say to people I grew up in Frankfurt more than Maritzburg. I spent 6 months of my life. That's the longest I actually stayed permanently in Maritzburg for in my entire life.
Okay.
The rest of my life I actually spent in Frankfurt. It's a small town next to Villiers off the freeway.
Right.
The N3 is about, I think, 30 km from outside to Villiers. And so that's where I actually grew up and got from what's called grade 1 now was called AHA. That's where I did my first grade. And that's where I actually matriculated as well.
Okay.
That's cool, that's great. And while you were growing up, what did you envision as your dream career?
Interestingly, I've always wanted to be a doctor.
Oh, cool.
It's only been interesting when I actually got older and I realized my older sister, I've got an older sister, she was doing medicine and she told me what was actually happening. First year she said, no, you'll cruise through first year. The challenge is second year, where you actually start doing the real medical doctor work. He said, no, you get your own corpse that you're going to have to work on. And I said, okay, that's -1.
Yeah.
And then he said, there's a lot of blood because you now start visiting hospitals. And so I said, okay, that's out of the window. That's actually how I actually got out of being a doctor.
Fair enough. In fact, I think I've heard a lot of people, when they get the cadaver, then that's when they're like, no, actually, this is not for me.
With that cadaver story, I said, no, I cannot own a dead body.
Right. And Thando, who inspired you in your early days?
My life has been inspired by my family more than anything else, by my grandparents and my dad. Reason being, my grandfather usually started living on a farm in the Free State. That's how we ended up in Frankfurt. They lived on a farm in a town called Dwelling. That's Dwelling in Afrikaans. Twins, basically. And he then vowed that his son would not work for the farm. And when my dad got to standard 5, he wanted to send my dad to a boarding school, and the farmer said, it's either he comes work on the farm or you both leave my farm. And he said, I'd rather leave your farm than to see my son suffer like I suffered. So that's how he actually got out. And my dad was then shipped to Richmond in KZN. That's where he actually studied. So from just that mentality, and my dad was very known to be quite a smart person, I was told. And because he skipped a lot of classes, in those days you could do standard 1 to standard 3 in 1 year because of his brain capacity. So my whole life has been around my grandfather and my dad's achievement, because I call it an achievement for someone to make up your mind to say, this is what I want for my son or for my kids. And that's the man that's been probably the backbone of my life as well, my grandfather.
Right.
Awesome. And then in terms of your career, what would you say was the biggest turning point?
I may not remember the year, but when I joined Daimler Chrysler around 98, 99, I was told you're just going to be what they call a parts testing specialist as a mechanical engineer. But I wasn't told I was actually going to head up R&D for South Africa.
Wow.
And when I got there, that's when Mercedes-Benz was launching a C-Class for the South African market to compete with the 3 Series BMW, because the perception about the Merc has always been an old man's car. And the 3 Series was actually about to bring about the same vision of the 3 Series. And so the whole thing that the team was brought in was actually even youngsters in the R&D team. So I was told, okay, you're going to head up the R&D team. I'm like, oh, shucks. And what now? And that's when actually my life turned around completely. I got to spend some time in Russia and Sindelfingen for 2 years in between. And started trying to design. So basically, the vehicle was already designed, but the components were not fully designed because the different conditions in the different countries have different demands on the electronic system. So I literally, my first design was actually design the vehicle on the board, literally on a circuit board. Just make sure that all the components that are being designed are actually going to be functional. That's when my life took a totally different turn. I used to spend between 12 and 14 hours in the office until my boss decided, no, it's not good for you. You just can't be. I said, this is what I'm enjoying doing. It was fun, starting stuff from scratch with really no one pushing you and saying you've got the whole. It's you tell us what needs to be done with your team. So that's when my life really turned around in the manufacturing space.
So those were the days when Mercedes took on BMW head-on.
That's the first time that Mercedes took on BMW head-on.
And we got those cool ads like BMW beats the Benz. Remember that one in Chapman's
Peak? Chapman's Peak, yeah.
That's the first ad that was done by BMW that we beat the Benz.
Yeah.
It was actually directed at Mercedes.
Yes, that's right, yeah. It was great.
He said Chapman's Peak.
Yeah, that's right.
So Thando, can you tell us what is driving you today?
Look, throughout my career, I read a lot of books. I've had to read a lot of books. I've had a lot of mentors in my space. My first mentor was actually a German, come to think of it. And all he wanted to see was the results. Every discussion, the relationship was very interesting, is that in the workspace, you would think we actually hate each other. And once you move into the private space, you would think something doesn't make sense. So these guys are like best buddies. And that's when I first learned to differentiate between work and play. That was the first time that I realized. So what drives me now is actually, I've met a lot of people around my space. What drives me now is actually seeing changes and results, because what I do now in my space is, for the past probably 15 years of my life, has been doing business turnarounds. It's either involved in setting up a manufacturing facility or turning around a manufacturing facility. So yeah. What drives me now is seeing people growth, because in it you see people growth, you see people, achieving results, and people change in perception and mentality of people. Because when you come in as a turnaround specialist, everybody says, well, they've brought in someone who's going to be very difficult, and you tend to make a lot of difficult decisions. It's not one of those nice jobs, but it's one of those very fulfilling jobs. I go home and I sleep. I always say to people, when I go home, I sleep. I don't go home and start thinking about something else. Yeah, that's what drives me now.
Right.
Going home and sleeping.
Awesome.
Very good.
And then how do you see manufacturing in South Africa changing in the future?
Well, we've got a long way to go, in my opinion, honest opinion. Just to look at it from a global perspective, we're competing with the likes of China. If you spend a lot of time with the Chinese, you get to realize the turnaround time when they develop something is very short. It's like a quarter of the time that we do it in South Africa.
Very quick, yeah.
Very, very, very quick. And we now got to move away from an industrial sort of mindset to a technological mindset. I'm saying this is where we now need to start developing smart factories. I need to be sitting at home and saying, this is how the factory is doing. What else do I need to do in the next to stay competitive? So the South African space definitely needs technology to drive it. But more than that, I think our industry is what, I'm going to talk about tertiaries and universities. Our biggest industry is the mining space, is the automotive space, and a lot of FMCG. But if you look at our degrees, how they're structured, I'm a mechanical engineer by profession, but how our degrees are structured are not focused on specific industries to develop that so that people get to sort of specialize. If you look at the likes of China, or especially in Germany, where I spent a little bit of time, what I realized was that it's not everyone that's going to be an academic or a special engineer. The education system is such that if somebody is on a technical stream, they can go into there's some people that are hands-on, there's people that are theoretical. And I think our manufacturing needs that kind of appetite, where companies bring in a skill without saying how it's going to be my return on investment only. and say what's going to be the return on investment next 10 years, 15 years. Currently, we're I would say, very short-sighted.
Yeah.
We're looking to the 3 years, 5 years space instead of looking at the 10 years, 15 years. What do we need to do differently to keep the market? Because, truth be told, we have the access to the continent and we've got a lot of resources. I used to say to people, it used to be very interesting many years back. We'll go to Germany and say, how's Africa? And everybody thought, well, if you come to South Africa, you find lions walking in the streets, elephants and all of that. And say, yeah, no, I've got a little crocodile in my backyard. And people would believe you. And up until they come in, they realize, oops, actually we got better off. So fortunate enough for me, I was able to see the east side of Eastern Germany and Western Germany. And how the Western German guys, they hated what had happened in the Eastern German side because of what communism had done. So we now need to get into the mindset to say, how do we become so future-oriented, structured in a way to develop technologies ahead of time? That's where I see manufacturing going in this country. And saying what has been the learnings from the global space. Same thing that I've seen in China, more than anything else. When we were throwing our big metals here, they were taking it in and they're actually rebuilding machine and selling it back to everybody in the world.
That's great.
So what else is there for South Africa to do is to say, okay, how do we replicate that? So there's so many examples in my life that I share with people. I say, if you look at as a child, there was something called a Japanese scrap. Those were made in Japan, the toys. Now Japan is one of the best. Now we started with China. China is being made in China. But now China is actually becoming one of the best. So if we can learn from those technologies and say, how do we then continuously rebuild or reshape ourselves? That's what I'd say manufacturing needs to look at, to have that mentality.
And Thando, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future manufacturing leaders?
What I'd probably say is become a people's person. It's very important to understand the people around you and the different strengths people bring into your team. You know, all I say to the guys, I'm not a know-it-all. And somebody said to me, you've done so many turnarounds. I said, how do you do it? My wife always says to me, you must be nuts. You're going into another challenge. I said, yeah, the problem is that I'm going to fall asleep too many times if I stop doing it. So having the resources, having the skill, learning to be able to listen and be sort of very process-driven. Don't worry about personalities. Personality for me, it always comes second. But what's actually what's the reality that you're facing. You know, I learned, I think when I joined Toyota around 2001, 2002, I came in as an engineering manager and I got into the production line. And this old man said, wow, you're an engineer, you're the boss man. Yes, I had a young boss. Yeah, I'm your boss. And he said, okay, so tell me, my son, you actually as old as my grandson, so I'm going to call you my grandson. What are you going to tell me that's different that I've been doing for the past 20 years? I was actually there to tell him about a torque machine, you know, how to torque bolts onto you when you put the wheel up. I said, no, there's nothing much. I'm actually here to learn from you. It changed the whole mentality right away, and he started wanting to share more than wanting to create this wall. I didn't realize that at that time, and that's what the relationship grew. And I did that very instinctively. I had not learned that skill from anywhere. It was just instinctive to say, what can you tell me with your 20 years of experience? So I'm saying in that space, it's going to be very critical. It's going to be very critical for anybody that works with people or dynamics of manufacturing, to understand the people, to understand the culture, the different cultures there. The fortunate part for us in South Africa is these 11 official languages, but there's probably a lot more than 11 languages in South Africa. So being able to discern between these different cultures, because within the Zulu there's a Zulu culture, within the Tswana there's a Tswana culture, and then within Afrikaans there's even an Afrikaans culture, and within the English people there's also an English culture that's different from one to the other. So that becomes your driver for people. But the one thing that people must know about you is you are who you are in front of them. You're not going to be the same person here and a different person when you get home. So my wife always says that what you see is what you get. It's very important to be loyal. I call it being loyal to myself more than anything else, for me to see the results.
Awesome, that's great. Yeah, very nice. And in your manufacturing career, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
The biggest challenge was actually when I joined a company called Meso Minerals. It's a mining company. It's Finnish owned. I had been doing a lot of consulting and engineering space and mentoring and coaching engineers. They said, are you willing to sell part of your business and join us? We've got a factory in, I think it's a Vereniging, it's a rubber factory. We need that factory turned around and we want you on board. In about 8 months, the factory was turned around and all of that. So it seemed very easy to turn around that factory because it was very simple, it was press driven, it was mechanical, we could do things. And then the board decided, no, we think we actually got a better project for you. We're going to let you carry on running this factory, but we're going to give you another factory which is in KZN and it's a foundry. And there are about, I think, 500 plus people on site. And when I joined the foundry, it was very interesting to see the totally different mentality, totally different culture within the same company. And a highly unionized factory, very, very loyal in terms of who they would sort of bow to. Zulu-driven culture in the space of it. So the hierarchical structure is very critical in the Zulu space. And when I joined the foundry, what was very interesting for me was that I went around as my usual self talking to people. Firstly, I had never had a boss who would walk the factory. And because they expected the factory to sit in your high tower somewhere in your office. Like I said, for me, you need to be a people's person. Because information is not sitting with your management team, it's actually sitting with the guys on the floor. That's what the reality is. And within the first 2 weeks, we got something called a furnace. I'm not sure how much you're familiar with the furnace. A furnace blew up. And I said, oh shucks, what now? Because I got a call from the safety manager to say the furnace is actually blown up, so we needed to empty the factory and get everybody out of the foundry. So I then dashed through and said, we make sure that the fire was under control and all of that. And one of the managers, actually 2 of the managers came to me and said, Thando, why don't you just shut down the factory? We know we were not making money, we were a loss-making business. We were told that we actually just here to just make sure everything is wrapped up nicely. So this is your opportunity, just close the factory. And I said, there's a lot of actually people that are going to lose jobs, it's really necessary, but it's actually something that's very salvageable from my perspective. And it took us 4 weeks at least, I would think, to put the furnace back together because your hydraulics was gone, your electronic system was gone, your PLCs were gone. And that, for me, was one of the biggest turning points in my career because, eventually I got into a factory that every month was turning over about 300 tons of metal. I got it to turn around 800 tons of metal. And so it became the other change point in my life again. To say, if you really focus on what's actually happening. And again, I must admit, there was a lot of people in the team that had the experience but did not know how to discern the information and put and add up everything else. We had to do a lot of change management as well because I had met up with old white Africans, male, that had been with the factory for many years. To come and say, look, I think you've done a great job, but I think it's about time you leave. And HR director used to say to me, how do you speak to people? They come to us and say, we've actually told them they need to leave, but they actually think they actually need to leave.
Nice.
So that's been one of the most interesting parts of my life.
So Thando, if you were to design a curriculum for future manufacturing leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in?
Like I think I've said, technology, you must be very technologically driven. But more than anything else, you must be very tenacious because there's, when I grew up, they used to say it gets colder and colder as you go higher and higher. It does get colder. Because you sit by yourself and you say, how do I make this work? So you're going to have to learn to cut off a lot of people out of your life. It's the reality of it for you to be able to think. You're going to have to, I think there's a book by Jack Welch called Winning. Jack Welch who ran General Electric. If you follow that, you realize how cutthroat that space he was in and how many decisions that were personal decisions but business decisions. To say, this is what I need, this is what I don't need, and then follow through with those decisions. Because I think any manufacturing leader, if you don't follow through, you cannot start something and say, then I'm going to hand it over to somebody to run with it. yes, at the senior level, there's certain things that you're going to need, but there's certain things that you're going to have to just oversee and make sure those people are resourced enough. So all I always say to people is that in the leadership space or in the manufacturing space, you're there to provide the tools and become the enabler of people. But again, the people factor comes in. Say, without people, you're not going to get the results going. So you're going to have to really make sure that people understand who you are, what you're trying to achieve, and that it's not about the person in themselves, it's about the job. What are you here for? And so any future leader, I would say, if you're going to take the emotions out, I can remember many years ago, I never used to cry. Up until I lost my dad. That was the first time I actually cried after I lost my dad. Because I was told men don't cry. I've learned that you can cry even as an adult in your own space. This time the crying is not about having tears, it's about sitting and having a meeting with yourself. That's how I actually define it these days. So for a future leader, it's going to have those meetings where you're going to have arguments back and forth and challenge yourself. Because if you're not challenging yourself, people are not going to challenge you. You're going to just come and become, okay, yes. So that's what I would say the future leader needs to look like. Be able to attract the people that you need. Be the magnet. I was told you work harder on yourself than you do on your job. So my focus has always been how do I work on myself to get the desired results. The surroundings come by the by, and that's how you get the result. That's just my philosophy.
And in terms of social media, what advice would you give manufacturing leaders on how to build their leadership brand using social media?
People have got to know that there's a softer side of you, or there's a human side of you in life. Because some people think, well, you're an MD or you're a leader, you don't really have the softer side. Personally, I take part in a lot of sports. I'm a sporty person. I cycle around. I've done the Comrades, I've done the 2 Oceans.
Wow.
I've done the tour between cycling from here to Durban for charity. And so in my social media space, I do advertise all of that so people see it actually can be fun. But I also sort of share stuff about philosophy in terms of how to be yourself. People do not see you as just this bureaucratic or this business or just this person that just wants things done by the book or something else. So in the social media space, it's very interesting when people, make an example, I posted there was this suit challenge on social media. And a lot of people have never seen me in a suit, and I actually got a couple of suits, very interestingly enough. And I've had to attend a lot of meetings in a suit, wearing a suit. And when I said to people, you never thought I could wear a suit. In actual fact, out of, I think, 200-300 people that made a comment, 80% of said, we never thought you can actually wear a suit. You either think you're either running or cycling or working.
Nice.
So the social media space, they have actually got the whole interaction. From the LinkedIn page, page is more a professional page, but it's the likes of Twitter, Facebook. I've actually found employees from Facebook, from Twitter. I would tweet for a position, I'm looking for this course. One of my challenges is that if I send it to an employment agency, it might take this long because they need a brief, they need this. And if I need something immediately, and literally I tweet myself, and my HR people are always like, but Thando, he said, no, I just need a quick response.
Yeah.
So you literally get a lot done in that short space of time. And people usually say to you, well, we can't find people. I said, there's plenty of people out there. If there wasn't, they wouldn't have an unemployment crisis in this country. So I saw you use social media for various aspects. Finding employees, sports side, and just having fun.
Okay. And touching on the COVID crisis, Thando, how do you think will this change the landscape, the manufacturing landscape in South Africa?
Yeah, it's been the biggest change for anybody. Because none of us have actually experienced COVID before. No one knew what needed to happen. When the first announcement came, I was literally a week away from flying out to Sweden for a meeting, for a meeting. And I had to return and say, well, I need to close the factory. Make sure all the factories are closed down because there's COVID. And you say, but what does it mean? Do I continue paying people? What do I do? And to actually say, well, no work, no pay. Do you now go back to the union and say, now you can have it back, or you go in? It's, I wouldn't lie, it was a catch-22 and a very confusing time and a challenging time. But in hindsight, I'm glad it happened. It changed the mindset to say we could actually do more with less. We've started realizing that the factories can actually be run with a lot less people, many different machines at different times. And we actually learn to utilize or optimize our resources better. And I'm seeing in the future the more and more development in the robotic space. The automotive space, where a lot more robotics developed, it's become much easier. But the mining space has been very, very young. I keep saying to the guys, we're still 20 years behind the times in the mining space. And the more we talk about it, the more I realize how much robotics we need to develop and how many skills we need to bring on board. Totally different set of skills. You no longer want hardcore labor, you're now wanting a guy that will run a factory, 2 or 3 guys will run 10 different machines. Sitting at home and one person being on site, one person off site, and just roaming around like that. Because the opportunity is there. It has actually shown us that if you guide the resources in a specific direction, that you would like to achieve something, it changes the meaning completely. You know, there's things that we're now able to see. There's certain people that you don't need. You know, we were joking with a friend of mine. I said, look, if you're a discovery now, do you really want to say, well, the buildings that I've just built in Sandton, do I actually need them? Looking at how many people are actually sitting at home. And I've got a friend in the banking space. They have been at home for the past year and they intend to be at home for the next year. So the manufacturing space, you're going to say, well, they're actually the hardcore skills, which are the actual doers you actually need on the factory part. Your admin and all of that. Those are people that you can actually do away with. Let them work from home. You can actually give them contracts and have a lot less costs to become globally competitive. That's why I actually see this going. That's just my plans or my intentions, to use that to my advantage.
I like that. So very challenging, but also created an opportunity at the same time.
It has.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that you've mentored a lot of people in manufacturing and future leaders. Can you share a success story of one of the people that you've mentored?
I'll mention, yeah, I have. So many of them that I've actually taken under my wing and very challenging circumstances. The more recent one I can talk about is the guy when I took over the foundry. And I brought in a new guy, a young guy from a competitor and made him a production manager. And when he joined me, he had all of these. He was a process engineer, he was a metallurgist. All he could think about was just processes and not thinking wide enough. And if you said to him, I need a report, he would be guaranteed the report every day with the structure. And I said to him, there's things that I'm going to be able to teach you from a manufacturing perspective and from a people interaction perspective, but there's something that I'm not going to be able to teach you, which is how to think better. And I said to him, from next day you'll be doing an MBA. And he said, no, that thing is said to be difficult. I've done one myself. It's just a lot of information and a lot of time spent dealing with information. There's nothing difficult about an MBA. Yes, it is challenging in terms of time because you learn about politics, interacting with people and all of that. And today, he's left Meso himself. He now runs, he works for a company, I think in Ladysmith. He actually joined them as a production head and they made him a group production manager. And he's actually now their corporate head. Looks after all the other issues other than just production. He's now into procurement. So I'm saying, the time I've spent with him, and I said to him, each time you come to me, you need to know your story and your details. Don't come to me to say, this plant failed. So the plant failed, why did it fail? Who was involved? What have we done about it? Is it a human issue? Is it something that we could have prevented? So a lot of people, so what I really do is challenge the person, not, I can remember there's days when he said, Mr. TM, he calls me Mr. TM. So do you really want to fire me? You can fire me now because he was a very emotional character and need me. I said, okay, when you're done with your antics, call me. And then we can talk. So the guy's name is Daniel, and he's done pretty well. There's a couple of them that I've dealt with in that space, and some of the guys are in different aspects. One of the guys that I can talk to is now in Venda, I think. He runs his own business. When I met him, he was an artisan. And interestingly enough, you have a general manager who's got this relationship with this artisan. And we started talking. the thing that actually happened was he started talking to me about his personal issues. And I said, you know what? You know, there's always stories about baby mama, this, my ex is this, and my child, my daughter said, don't worry about her, you cannot fix her, fix yourself and just take care of your child. That's all that's important to you. Don't worry about the rest of the issue and then focus on your job. Because when you come here, we're not interested in what your problems are at home, we actually want you to do the job. Because he was trying to explain to me that why did he do something wrong.
Okay. Excuse, yeah.
I said that becomes an excuse.
Yeah.
That guy today owns his own business. He started from there, he actually changed, his whole mindset changed very completely. He started being on time, he started doing things very methodically. And then he decided when we had an opportunity to retrench, he said he's going to take a pay. And he came to me and said, you see this opportunity outside, so what can he do? I said, if you think it's the right opportunity, go for it. I'll tell you what you can do and I can share my experiences, but it's actually your decision, not my decision. But just know that your decision is what you will have to live with. And today, I think he's got now 3 or 4 trucks. He transports raw materials between companies.
That's awesome, yeah.
So yeah, it's been that interesting.
And Thando, looking back over your leadership journey and maybe your learning journey, who are the role models of leadership that you would suggest future leaders, future manufacturing leaders should study and learn from?
More than just people, I would say systems and companies. And I'd make more reference to the likes of Toyota, which I learned quite a lot from them. Especially in the automotive space, I learned quite a lot from Daimler Chrysler or Daimler Benz at that stage. And then the likes of Jack Welch, you know, you've always I use him as a reference a lot. But when I read the book Winning, it intrigued me. The point of winning was that at the end of the day, you've got to win. Whatever you do, you need to win. And one of the other guys was, as I actually said, was my mentor. It was Michael Rosa from Germany. And all we were about was getting things done the right way and making sure you understood what were the principles behind. I didn't realize then how much respect, you know, it had always been that Germans are the best, but how much respect the Germans had for a Toyota factory. How much they learned in terms of the system, you know. Toyota comes with what they call cars and continuous improvement and respect for people. You've got to respect the people around you. Regardless of your position, you've got to be able to go down to the level and engage at that level. Don't go to an operator and not engage at the board level. You've got to talk past that person. And you mentioned, there's a lot of Jack Welch you mentioned in his book, Winning, about how resources can be reshuffled to suit the business. Don't always look about how many people can I get rid of. It's about how many people can I actually sustain in the business and move on with those people. So that in the future I don't need any more people, but empower the skills that I actually have on board. So it's more than about philosophies, more than just people for me.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers would love to connect with you on social media. What are you open to that, and which method would you prefer? Is it LinkedIn, Facebook, website?
I am on the social media space. I am on LinkedIn. Thando Makhoba, that's what you'll find. I always say to people, if you look for a different name, you will not find me. Whatever is in my ID book, some people cannot even pronounce. So if you look for Thando on LinkedIn, Facebook, I am on Twitter. I am on Instagram, but I'm a versatile on Instagram because I don't have the capacity to be always taking photos and all of them. But generally, those are the main ones. I am available on social media. And people can interact with me.
Awesome. I'm intrigued now. What's in your ID book?
You're intrigued?
Yeah, what's in your
My
ID
full
book?
name is Thando Makhoba.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
People still go Thando, and they bite their tongue with the rest.
Nice.
It's a very long name.
And last but not least, Thando, is there one piece of advice that you would like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own life?
I would say read and read and read. Don't just focus on one particular side of life. If you're an engineer or whatever, don't just think all the books I can read is about engineering. I think read about philosophies, read about people's lives around you. You know, biographies are very interesting. Actually, when I read the first biography, I was like, And then you start reading more biographies, then you start finding you need to get to know people and what makes them tick. So reading is one of them, and but more than anything, be true to yourself. Don't be fake. That's what I always say. People would rather give you names than being who you're not. You know, people always say, I'll make an example typically about myself. I'm very particular about time, especially when we cycle on Saturdays with friends. So if we say we're leaving at 6, my time is at 6 we're leaving, we're not arriving on the site. And literally I would start cycling at 6 and I would leave. You know, you go to the stage of even my own kids have learned that if we say we're leaving at 5 we're not picking stuff and putting them in the car. At 5 the car is actually reversing and leaving the house. So be yourself, I would say, find out more about who you are so that you can actually share more with people. Because if you don't know who you are, it's very difficult to then share with people and express yourself. That's just my take.
Awesome.
Well, Thando, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you. It's very good. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.